So Mr. Rin is going to join me for the question period. He has a background in engineering in, I can't remember what your degrees are. Physics. So he is, if you have special questions about careers in mathematics and higher level math and college level math, he's the best person to ask. After I got my AP credits, I didn't do math again in college. I loved it, but I just didn't need to. Let's turn off the projector. Okay. Are there any questions about what we talked about today? Yes.
A while ago, on Facebook, you posted an excerpt out of one of your practices, the work of art.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
The idea of making work extremely neat.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, I thought to myself, I don't think, I understand that I would love to hear more about it, because my perception has always been, you start in the evening, by morning you have 15 pages of scratches on there, and somehow, somewhere, an answer comes out. And it is that kind of freedom that I associate with math.
Okay, so the question, she's asking about another practice I have in my class. They can't say the word workbook. Instead, they have to call it work of art. And we've crossed out the word on the cover and written work of art underneath it. Now, this idea, like most of my ideas, started because I was lazy. It started because the work that they were turning into me was very sloppy, hard to read. They were making lots of mistakes because they weren't showing all of their work. And so what I did was I said, we are going to treat these like a work of art. Every single problem you're going to do, this is especially for the story problems, you're going to draw a model, you're going to show all the work, and you're going to write a complete grammatical sentence of the answer. Now, my logic behind it is twofold. One, I'm lazy and I want it to be easy to grade. And two, I want the children to not just look at the work as something that they need to dash out quickly. I want them to actually take pride in it. I want them to look at it as something that's not just correct but beautiful, that they can look at and say, I really tried hard on this. Now, one of the things that we did at the end of the first half of the year, when they had finished the first workbook, and everyone had every single page correct, and they had shown a model for each story problem in a complete sentence. We had a party. I called it the gallery opening, where we put up all of their workbooks around the room, and I got some sparkling apple juice and poured it into glasses, and then they all signed the corks, and it was a fun little party. So, yeah, laziness, and also I want them to have respect for their own work. Anything else? I was really hoping to get some hardball questions.
You mentioned a couple of things that you would talk about in the question period.
Sure. So the one that I really like is the Freud called his method the talking cure, and for some reason I use the same term when I'm giving a tutorial. It's the talking cure for poor math skills. If the child has a great difficulty focusing, and they get lost in the steps, talking can be very valuable to them. What I do in the tutorials is I take the pencil and I will only, it's really like the teach the teacher game, but forcing them to explain the steps one at a time, it disciplines their thoughts so that only one thought can come out at a time. This is good for kids that might have attention deficit disorder or other focus problems, and it also forces them to be very clear and precise with their thinking if they have to express in words what they want me to do. So that's one of the things that I liked with talking and remedial work.
You also mentioned homework from the students.
Oh, yeah. So one of the problems, the obstacles that I face as a teacher is when a student comes in and they think they already know what I'm going to teach them. And this usually happens very innocently. They might pick up a fun math game for the computer or a fun workbook they see in a bookstore, and they'll learn how to solve a few rudimentary problems, but then they feel like they already know that material. Now, one of the things that I really like is that with the homework, this is shown. So some of my students give me homework that has square roots and cube roots on it, and these are third graders. And it's charming that they're familiar with these concepts, but the fact is they could not give me a story problem with a square root or a cube root in it. So it's a good way for me to kind of illustrate that, okay, you know how to solve this problem, but you don't yet know how to give me a story problem for it. You wouldn't recognize this in the real world if you saw it. So that's the homework that they make and the concepts they feel like they're familiar with. Also, that homework is so darn cute. They'll make it look like the workbook, because they'll have, one student gave me, after I found the answers, it was instructions for a paint by number drawing that he had traced out of a book. So I then I figured out that this is 6, and then I color in all the 6s with blue. And then I teach this child history, so it was a drawing from history. My heart almost broke. It was so cute. Yes?
Are the grades taught the same way?
So they are and they aren't. They are taught conceptually, but not with the same methods that I was outlining. Mr. Black, he has a lot of Socratic back and forth with the kids to try and get to talk them into the answer, to get them to think. He has to use all the vocabulary to get them to get to the answer and to understand the process. And then they take a lot more notes in the higher grades on math. Now, I never took notes when I was in high school because it would have been worthless. I didn't understand the concepts that I was writing on the page. But our students, because they're more familiar with this vocabulary, they're able to write down the notes and then read those notes and use them to solve problems. I never read, like I said before, I never read the textbook, but our students would be able to read the textbook and make sense of it. Yes?
Can I just share my favorite experience as a parent
Sure.
at the school in relation to math curriculum? Lana came home one day with her workbook, her work of art book. And she said, she showed me a multiplication of fractions problem, and she said, Mom, did I do this right? I looked at it, multiply the numerator, multiply the denominator. She said, yeah, you did it right. She said, oh no, I know that part's right. Did I make the model correct? Mm-hmm. So that part to her was just almost insignificant. Because she knew that the real important understanding came with the model, and that's what she wanted to make sure she got right.
Yeah. And that's another reason, well, like I was saying, I was lazy. That's another reason, is that we want them to realize that the emphasis is not on just getting the answer on 15 pages of scribbles with an answer at the end. The emphasis is on all these other things that show me that their understanding is rooted in reality. Yes.
I've been teaching Vandamme, and I'm just wondering if you've been teaching this conceptual math for a while, or this is something else within your
So it's been developing, and it is developing.
It's a work in progress.
Yeah.
Mr. Steele's been teaching math quite a bit longer than I have. I've taught the 3rd grade one year and just started teaching the 4th grade this year. So what I can say is that the purpose has always been there. The methods are constantly being developed. So we're constantly trying new things, seeing how they work, along those lines. So I do a lot of the same things that Mr. Steele does, and I also do some different things as well.
Yeah, I don't want to be accused of false advertising. If you go home and give your kids a quiz, a pop quiz on the names of the parts of a multiplication problem, that knowledge might be fuzzy right now. But it's something that we keep developing. We keep trying to find the balance between making sure they get the process and know how to solve the problem, and then making sure they get the richer understanding. It's not as though we're ignoring repetition and drill and being able to get the answer, but we also are including another element, and each year we refine the balance and we come up with new techniques and methods. I came up with Teach the Teacher like 4 years ago. I started to do homework 3 years ago, and all these things keep developing.
May I add one thing to that?
Yeah.
A similar lecture could be given for any subject in the school.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't hold this with the conceptual approach. So that's the sense in which This has always been true of Vandamme Academy, and it was true for the curriculum across the board. It's one of the things that defines the school as the most important to us is that in every subject, we want them not just to be repeating things back or finding patterns or doing things in a more in the mimicry style that we described. We want them to conceptually understand it. So the conceptual approach to education, I would say, is a theme throughout all the subjects.
Yeah, so to give an example from history, I'm not just having students memorize dates and progressions of kings or who won which war at which time. We want them to understand the values that were at stake, the ideas that were at play at different parts in history, what motivated the different characters and parties in history. We want them to understand it in a richer way than just a memorization of facts. Did you have a question, Mr. Honeycutt?
Yeah, so I was, so you gave the example, with multiplication of how the, conceptual approach differs from the standard approach. Is there any example that comes to mind when you get to the inherently more abstract subjects like algebra that would, differentiate the standard versus the conceptual Vandamme approach?
So I've been teaching third grade, and that's what I've been doing research and development on. Yeah. Come on up, yeah. We took the comfy chairs, though. Oh, that's got a camera on it. Don't move that.
Mr. Rod, here you go.
Can you give me a concept that you'd like to hear about that would seem typically?
Let's say how you deal with, the quadratic equation and something using to solve that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Let's say roots of the quadratic equation.
Yeah. Well, we did just recently teach that, and we used the Saxon curriculum. And
For the junior high grades, it's
yeah,
the Saxon.
In 8th grade, we went through that. And I show them, I'll throw a marker across the room and try to hit the trash can. And I'm indicating to them, they're looking at me like, why are you throwing stuff? We're not supposed to throw things in the classroom. And I'm telling them that anything that's subject to gravity is going to be able to be mapped with this, with what looks like I just spilled my alphabet soup. And that kind of catches their eye for a little bit, and we start talking about the development of it through, by then we've talked about factoring polynomials, and we've talked about divisibility in numbers, and I've related that to how through polynomials we can model things. And it does end up being incredibly vocabulary sensitive. And by the time I've talked about it, we have spoke about all the concepts that get there. On one hand, it does look like we're just substituting values for variables, but they see through the act of throwing it and through the story problems that are associated with it, how it can be used. But I don't really think I'm touching some sort of magic way of teaching the quadratic equation, but I can say that through our conceptual approach to that moment, it's almost just like a closure on something that's been developing for a long time.
It gets a lot harder the more abstract the concepts are, and that makes sense. But we at least want to make sure they can trace the skills in the quadratic equation back to earlier skills so that they can, it's a more hierarchical progression of knowledge.
Yeah, at that moment they're able to say, oh, I'm not just substituting values for variables to get a number or to get these two roots that I'm looking for. I'm actually able to determine, at what point in time an object's going to be where in its path or something like that. So there's the connection, that's the concept that exists.
Your answer brought up something that something fun for me that I wanted to talk about. If I had 1,000,000 years of free time, I'd study the history of math and how concepts developed. I play around with that a little bit in class. When I was teaching 2nd grade and I was teaching them about place value, I would have them try to solve problems with Roman numerals because there's no place value in Roman numerals, and they could start to appreciate what place value brings out. I even taught them Mayan numerals just so they could kind of see what these different ways of writing down numbers are, so that they can have a better appreciation for the superiority of Arabic numerals and how they give us place value and so on.
I'd like to add that Mr. Black has a monumental task in trying to apply this vision and apply this principle, which when I met Mr. Black, the reason that we had an instant great rapport was that we both had that goal. But then I gave him Saxon to teach from. And that, to try to use a conceptual approach and teach with Saxon is nearly impossible because Saxon's approach is pretty antithetical to the conceptual.
It's very rote.
Yeah, it's a great resource for a tremendous number of problems, and they constantly cycle, so it's not to be burned, you know.
It has virtues.
Yeah.
That's why it's being phased out.
Yeah.
I'm sure, you know, every parent has seen this when their kids, like, and I have a 7-year-old going here to VDA, and they say, you know, let's say there's a math problem, and, you know, they're coming to you for help or something like that, or maybe you're teaching them a new concept that they have kind of been exposed to in the school, and you tell them how to do it, and the first question they say is, this is not how my teacher told me. You know, so I'm sure every parent has heard that before. So
Yeah.
I'm guessing, I'm extrapolating what you're doing here, which is really good with the conceptualization, and saying, you know, when the kid, no matter how old they are, when they actually understand that, you know what, there's more than just a process, I think they're going to stop asking that question, and they're going to be more open to you telling them this is how you would solve it.
Yeah.
And the reason behind it, you know, and I kind of see that in my daughter. She's been here a few months, and I've kind of seen that, which is a great thing, because she always, like a year ago, she would just, you know, not listen to me. She's like, no, this is not how I learned it. So you know, what's your take on that? Do you believe it? At what time do you believe that they're going to stop asking that? Because they're appreciating it. Not because they're asking questions, but just
That it won't be a problem for them. This isn't the way I learned in class.
Yes.
Yeah. So in one sense, it'll always be a problem because they're going to be asking you for help on things that they're just learning, things that they don't have that strong conceptual understanding of. So when they're asking you for help, it's when they don't have the rich knowledge. But on the other hand, and also it's hard when things are put into a different way. But the more that it happens, the longer they are in the curriculum, the more likely they are they develop this skill for hearing another person's explanation, and they can kind of translate it into the concepts that they know, or maybe they see the concepts that they know in your explanation. But as far as that moment when they need help on math, it's going to be pretty normal for them to have that dissonance of, you're showing me something I haven't learned in my classroom, because they're asking you for help when their knowledge is very new.
Can I comment on this statement as well? Sure. Do you have anything to say before I go ahead? So as a teacher for 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, and 8th grade, I'm transitioning students from basic arithmetic through abstract thinking, And there are times where a student has been instructed for a number of years by me, and a concept comes up. They come home to speak to their parents, and they're like, no, Mr. Black says don't even say that. I've got to think about it like this. Parent comes to me, and I feel terrible. I'm like, look, well, yeah, you know, I'm fairly eccentric in the classroom sometimes, I guess, and you're helping me grow. You know, if I wonder what it'd be like if I actually saw myself teaching day after day. But there are moments where taking advantage of a child that's developing. So if I were simply a 5th grade math teacher and not also an algebra teacher, and having that same mind that was transitioned out of basic arithmetic into algebra, if I didn't handle that entire transition, if I was just simply charged with teaching the curriculum for that year, then I might use little nuanced statements like goes into for division, or I might just focus on how to most effectively instruct that student for that concept to demonstrate mastery on the test for that moment, instead of taking the teaching opportunity to realize that if I kind of present this really basic material right now in 5th grade in a way that's maybe challenging to them hierarchically, or maybe advanced vocabulary, or might be really strange, or might cause them to feel uncomfortable with how they did it in 4th grade, because I'm pushing them for where they're going. I know where they're going, and I know how it has to be presented to them in order for them to take that transition and be able to effectively manage calculus and all these other concepts that they're going to receive. So it's more instead of just trying to accomplish this chunk of curriculum that exists at this moment in time, it's saying, I know the vision of where you're going, so I know of the nuances that need to exist. So there are times where I'm telling a child, I'm not, listen to this and understand what's being presented right now. And when you go home and you see it presented differently, of course you need to listen. No one's ever going to try to lie to you and tell you that this isn't, I'm not saying that it has to be just like this. You always want to listen, and you want to think about, what have you been taught? What else is there to be said about it? And that's one of the beautiful things that I find in math. And that's actually what attracted me to math, was that there was certainty. I struggled with interpreting pieces of art and reading and stuff like that, but something that has an answer, regardless of its approach at times, that's something to hold on to. So if that addresses your issue.
Mrs. Sarmans.
Actually, I was thinking about that with the model for the math book.
Singapore.
The Singapore math, that you can already see it leading into algebra. And then especially too with the books that my sons brought home, you see the multiple levels. So it's like they have to solve the first part of the problem, and then there's the second part of the problem, and all of that. So you see how that all leads into algebra. Is that sort of a plan?
Well, it's funny. There have been times where I've opened up the workbook and said, I don't know how to solve this without algebra. And the first time I teach the curriculum. And the Singapore program does have models that go up through algebra. And you can see that the models lend themselves to it very well. You can just put X as the value for any of the parts, and you can take a big step towards understanding whatever you're doing in algebra. Well, good. So quite a few. Yes.
Okay, so I have actually a couple of things. One, I wanted to make a comment on this discussion about going home and having another explanation, because I know Mr. Blackner, we've had that happen a lot. But I think actually the beauty of it is that it helps, especially if you can make the connection at home, which can be challenging, with the way you're explaining and the way a teacher is explaining, and how they both kind of merge into the same thing. That really helps them develop a richness.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The fact that they can grasp that from 2 different ways, or maybe 3 different ways, I think that says a lot.
Yeah. Having multiple explanations, different explanations at home and at school, is challenging and difficult, but it's not a bad thing. It can lead to a stronger understanding of the concepts.
So that's one thing. And the other thing that actually I was wondering if you could just comment on, was from what I see, I think the repercussions of this type of curriculum are a little bit different, in terms of testing, are a little bit different, because it seems that, so in the standard approach, when you do the math, you learn the patterns, and then you prove to your teacher via a test that you know these patterns. It seems to me in this approach that it's almost like the homework that they do maybe has a higher significance, because they have to take the time to grasp it and show it to you in full detail. Is that true? Is that something is there like more of a reliance on how well they do their problems?
So there's a couple of things. We still have testing like any conventional curriculum at the end of a unit or at the end of a semester to make sure that they understand and can solve these problems. And when you said homework, did you mean the homework they make for me? Is that what you were talking about?
No, actually, well, I was referring to the homework. I mean, not the homework necessarily, but the work.
Yeah.
Because the problems they go through, they're going through them a lot more in detail. They're spending a lot more effort doing that. So, don't you grade those
Yeah.
work?
Yeah.
So do you, what I'm trying to get at is there sort of a more of a emphasis on the work instead of the tests, or is there any
Yeah.
questions of that?
Yeah, so I guess another smaller way that we're different from the curriculum that I grew up with, the practices, the classwork was always just practice for the test. It was graded, but it was never corrected, and it was a very small part of the overall grade in the class. But in my grade, especially in the younger grades, the daily work, the work in their works of art or workbooks, that's much more, that's how they're showing me that they understand these concepts. Now, another way that we're different is they have to correct all of their mistakes in their daily work, and I never had to do that when I was a kid. I just throw it over my shoulder when I got my worksheets back. So that's another way that we ensure their understanding, is that they will keep working on the problems until they get the questions correct.
So does that kind of take the pressure off tests somewhat? Or is it, does it, I'm just wondering, because it's...
If I can speak on this, because your daughter's in my class. I'm sorry for interrupting.
No, go ahead.
The way I presented tests with her, for good or bad, I have no idea, is, I basically, on a Friday, present them with 3 questions that they have no idea which questions they're going to be, but they're going to be from the most recent material that they've had, 3 to 5 questions. And they're going to be, and they're going to count just as much as the daily work that they've been doing. It holds them accountable for their work. I get to see exactly what they're doing and how they're doing it and address issues immediately. Now, a detriment, perhaps, is that they're not feeling some kind of pressure cooker, like, oh, this is a big test that I've got to pull my hair out for and cram for. I mean, it's just something that's going to occur, and it's not going to be different. In fact, I even started using the abbreviation ICGA, because there was this issue, well, Mr. Black, you didn't tell us the test was coming, and I'm like, okay, it's just an in-class graded assignment as ICGA, so that it's just going to accrue a grade.
One thing I also wanted to say on that is the way we're teaching, we have much more exposure with the child. So I can look at many more things when I'm giving my evaluation of any given child. I can look at how well they explain things to me when I work with them one-on-one. I can look at how well they do perform in their exams. I can look at how well they perform in their warm-ups, how well they retain these things. And so it gives you a much larger scope of what the child is capable of in math.
I will say, my last thing on the topic of testing is, I do want to give more tests in my class. I think that, like Mr. Rinn was saying, we don't have classrooms with 30 and 40 kids. In those kinds of classrooms, testing is the only way to assess their progress, because it's the only time-efficient way to assess their progress. And I get wrapped up in the daily work and listening to their explanations. I think that one of my rooms, personally, one of my ways I can improve is to have more of the traditional testing, more of those, you've got to do this without the help of a teacher moments.
Yeah, and I know as the 8th grade teacher for math, children are leaving our experience and going into a high school where they are going to be dealing with time management issues. They're going to be dealing with structured tests in a different way.